All right, we got a big chunk of our movement system done. We go and press play here. And you can see we've got some good movement, we've got some jumping, and then the camera kind of does a little bit of a pull, which is cool, but just want to show you some tweaks in case you want it to be, you want to control that, like give it maybe a variable area where for example, let's position our character, for instance, a little bit closer to the center here, right? And on your Cinemachine camera here, what you can do essentially is we can play with a couple things, right? Um, we could play with like the dead zone, which essentially is the area where it won't move. So we could make it as wide as this essentially. So let's kind of look down here at our game window because this is where you're really going to see it. And what that'll do is as we're walking, it won't affect or won't move the camera within that area. So if we go up here to the main camera and we look through these parameters, it's really nice that it has the Cinemachine brain here, things like that. And you can actually set a channel mask for the things that you want it to render or not. But most of your actual setup is going to be on the Cinemachine here, the Cinemachine camera here. So example, if we go to expand our lens, you could see that we could play with the distance of how far we can go, the near clipping plane, things like that. But what might be cooler is, let me go ahead and just delete this camera. If we use an actual follow camera, and actually, let me leave that open for 1 second. Notice that when we use a default Cinemachine camera, we do have the ability to track a target. But if we want something with a little bit more like control over how it follows, you can go into targeted cameras and you can add a follow camera here. Now you can see that it gives you a bunch more results. So generally, you want to just name this follow camera. And I'd like to keep them near each other. So I'm going to delete this Cinemachine camera, and I'm going to drag my follow camera underneath my main camera. And it's the same thing as before. Here's my player. I'm just going to drag my player inside this area. But now you can see there's a whole other section here where we can actually, we have more parameters that deal with Cinemachine following. And so we have this where it talks about world space, the offset of following, right? Like in and out, things like that. And then we have this other area down here, the Cinemachine rotation composer. If we expand the dead zone here, you could see that it added 0.2 by 0.2. So let's kind of expand that out a little bit. That's almost to the size of that platform. And we'll make it a little bit bigger than the height of our character. So what is this going to do? Well, now when I press play, notice that I can fully explore. So you want this sort of thing if you're doing an adventure game where you want the person to be able to kind of explore an area. But notice that we kind of have this entire dead zone here where it'll kind of give it a little bit of space before it moves. And we can actually even increase that a little bit more if we want to. And let's try with this screen position a little bit. You can also move it and like shift it a little bit. So the camera will wait a little bit more before it goes off in that area. So it's just a little bit less movement as our character moves around. See that? So that's like the dead zone for the camera's movement. We'll keep those changes that we just played with just to have them. All right, now we have this like really, it's not necessarily the most beautiful blue background here for our camera. And if we select our main camera here, let's see, rendering here, or sorry, environment is what I'm looking for. I could just make this black for now, and that'll make it feel a little bit more 2D adventurous. You can also go in here, and remember we have these different platform layers, and we have this background tile map. And if we go into our tile palette here, you could pick something here. Maybe our character is in a dungeon, and I want something really dark. So let's see, I'll just kind of grab this center brick, and actually he could be underground in this dark dirt. You know what, I'm not going to get too crazy because the truth is, like, it's just fine, whatever it is. So for the center brick, I'm just going to go ahead and just, we have this background snow. I'm just going to right click here and I'm going to create another 2D object tile map, and it's just going to be another rectangular tile map. And I'm going to put it behind this one, and I'm going to call this background wall. And on this background wall here, let's go ahead and just make sure that we apply all here. And again, ideally you want to go inside of there. Now with this background wall selected, we want to go to add layer, and then inside of the sorting layers, I'm going to do another sorting layer, and I'm going to name this background wall. And I want to make sure this background wall is all the way behind this background. And then notice that this is on background wall here. So if I select it, as I select these, it switches it here. So I'm going to select background wall here. And what I'm going to do is really just kind of paint this whole background here. Let's say the end of our game is over here. And let's kind of put that in the corner, this in this corner. Just kind of flood that area using my paint bucket. You can see now we have like more of a background. And we haven't finished this out either. So let's just say that, you know, I'll let you kind of really have fun editing that later for your awesome game. But let's go ahead and just turn our brush on here. And then I want to make sure that I go to platform tile map. And I'm just gonna do something like this. All right, so for the time being, this is the length of our map, right? And we'd like it where our camera, as our game is moving, notice right now, if I press play, let me extend this up a little bit here. If I move this way, our camera can go off that wall. But what I'd like to do is kind of lock my camera so that it's always stopped here. So it knows that this is the beginning of my map, and not that that there's this infinity world that exists outside of this, or I guess the world as big as your computer memory. So what I'm going to do here is we have on this background wall here, we don't have a collider on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a polygon collider 2D, and it's going to give you this funky shape, which is like this big shape here. And if I turn this on, what I can do is just sort of tweak these points so that it matches something like this. Expand our points here for a second. And I think we could just make it force points. There we go. And I'm just wrapping the level in this collider 2D here. Okay, so we have our polygon collider here. And if you need to, you can add extra dots if you have an interesting level. If you hold control and you click on an edge, or it'll get rid of that. Now, something else we have to do, and please pay close attention to this, because I actually had to stop the video because it's very different than, at least for me, than Unity 2022, because we're using Unity 6. You want to select your main camera, and on the Cinemachine brain here, you want to make sure that you turn on lens mode override. The reason for this is the thing that we're going to do in the next step does not work, which is confining our camera to this space, the polygon space that we created, unless our camera is in perspective or orthographic mode. So you have to turn lens mode override, go to your follow camera, and now that'll let you change your mode override from none to either orthographic or perspective. I'm going to go with orthographic because that's generally what we want, this flat space. And remember, you have this orthographic size, which you can use as a sort of a zoom in. You also have these options down here on your camera itself, right? Now, the other thing is, I'm going to go ahead and remove this component and show you how to add it. We want to confine that area by going to Add Extension and click on Select. And you want to go to a Cinemachine Confiner 2D component. And that'll add it down here. And what this is going to do is it's going to take a look at this background wall bounding box, and it's going to allow our camera, you'll see our camera not be able to go past it. So here's our bounding box 2D. I'm just going to select my background wall here. I'm going to drop it inside of there. Now you saw it flips out a little bit with my mouse, which is very strange, but this I think is happening because we need to put our background wall here on its own layer. So I'm going to select the layer here. I'm going to hit add layer here, and I'm just going to name this bounds. And then we have to go to edit and then project settings here. And I don't want anything to affect my bounds here. So you can see here, here's my bounds layer. If these are probably going to be all checked on for you. And our layer matrix, this is under physics 2D. So you want to make sure all of these are checked off, something like that. And then we want to close this. Now the next thing we want to do is go back to your follow camera here. Let's see. We are in orthographic. We have our player as our transform. And I think I have to do oversized window. We don't want any stuff going on like that. Let's see, follow camera, background wall. This is tagged as bounds. We have our player here. There's something else I might be missing here. Let's see, follow camera. See if we bring dampening down and slow distance to 0. Let's see what happens when we press play. Interesting, our camera. See, here's our main camera. We have the follow camera in there. I'm just kind of debugging this because I want to make sure that you guys also have the solution. All right, so I figured out what the error is. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort of really quickly retrace through this step. So I'm going to remove this component here. And on my main camera here, you can see I have, follow camera set as my Cinemachine brain. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I want to make sure this is marked as bounds, right? Because remember, if we go to edit project settings here, in our physics 2D layer collision, we want to make sure it's not colliding with anything. But when I go inside of here, and you may not have this problem, but it's happening for me. I go to add the extension, which is the Cinemachine Confiner 2D. I grab my background wall, which has that on there. It starts to flip out. What happens is under procedural components here, I have this rotation composer. I want that set to none. And I want to make sure my rotations are zeroed out as well. So that's just looking flat at my character. Now with that on and my follow camera marked as bounds, right? And inside of here, the tracking target is set to player. When I press play now, you can see that my camera will take into account that polygon shape. Now we might want to put some collision there to stop our player from walking off. But it's framing on my character, right? And I also changed my scene to 1920, but you could just do free aspect, 16 by 9. But here's 1920 by 1080. You could see now it's tracking my character. And if I get to the edge of my map over there, my camera stops, right? It stops at the edge of this polygon shape here. Now what I'd like to do is, let's say, start my camera out a little bit further, right? So let's see, just to kind of give you an example. So say we start our camera out a little bit wider. But when we get to, for example, this flagpole or this stairs when I'm going down, I want it to zoom in. So anything I'm interacting with something, I'd like my camera to zoom in. And that has to do with something called state-driven cameras. So I'm going to right-click inside of here. And I'm going to go to my, let's see, right-click in the scene. And, oh, my recorder's in the way. Sorry about that. Cinemachine. Oh, not the camera. Sorry. Cinemachine here. And then I'm going to turn on state-driven camera. Now I'm starting to build up on my camera, so I'm just going to create an empty game object here and call this camera container. I'm going to grab my main camera, my follow camera, my state-driven camera, and just drop them underneath this. Now, by default, there's a, if I expand this, you can see it has a Cinemachine camera, but we already have a Cinemachine camera that we named follow camera. So I'm going to delete this one, and I'm going to add my follow camera here, and that'll make it one of my state-driven cameras. So this is sort of the container that has all this functionality for state-driven cameras. And so any camera, Cinemachine camera you put underneath it will be driven by this. It'll take into account all of this cool stuff that they have going on here. Now, if we look at our setup here, you can see here, right now it's currently set to solo, which is okay. Ease in and ease out is just the way that it animates between. And then it says, hey, you need an animated target in order to use this thing. So we're going to go and use our player because our player is animated. And so it's going to look at this animator component here. And so we can use these states, our climbing, idle, and walk animations, to affect the different states of our camera. All right, so in our list that's empty, I'm going to hit plus, and then let's start with our idle camera. Now it's going to say, hey, which camera do you want to use? Null. It only shows a follow camera. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to change follow camera to idle camera. And now we have one camera called idle camera. And so this camera itself could be, let's say, for instance, if we take our, and this is when we're idling, I could take my vertical field of view here, and instead of make it 50, I can just bring it in a little bit so it's kind of zoomed in. And then my follow camera, which really could just be our run camera, I'll leave this kind of zoomed out a little bit. And I'll let you guys kind of tweak the changes that you want for each one of these. So I'm going to make this idle camera, and then I'm going to add another one. And then for my walk, maybe I should name this walk camera, right? If my state is walk. Now let's select this. Now for my walk area, I'm going to select my walk camera. And if you look at our walk camera, remember we have this field of view, which is a little bit zoomed out here, right? All right, now if you want to look at the difference between these, you could turn on solo here, and you could say, oh, you know what, 50 is too far. So I'm going to play with this here. And then I'm going to go back to my idle camera. I'm going to click on, well, this one's because it's the high level, we'll be able to see it. So you can kind of like click between these, turn solo on, and see if it's too drastic of a jump. I can also duplicate this, and I can call this climb ladder or climb camera. And on climb camera here, what I'm going to do is I want this to be like really zoomed in. So let me go ahead and make this solo. And then for my field of view, I really want it to be zoomed in because it's kind of my interaction camera. So I could call this actually maybe interact camera. So anytime I'm interacting with anything, like another player or something like that, it switches to interact camera. So let's go back to our state-driven camera here. And I'm going to go ahead and add climbing here. And then I'm going to add my interacting camera. And again, you could make another state here if you want, just called talking, and then you could just use interacting camera. And that's just like a hyper zoomed in state. So here's our idle here. We can take a look at this. If we click solo, yeah. Now let's test this out. So I'm going to go ahead and press play here. And I'm going to move around. You could see it's really jarring. So when we're idling, let's see, the idle camera is at a field of view of 28. But as we start to move, let's see, it zooms out. And I think our walk camera is what, 38? So let's make this. And we could always adjust the like if you look at your state-driven camera, it has ease in and ease out and stuff. We can play with that easing. We could also adjust the time, which we'll talk about in a second. But I just want to make this a little bit better. So let's say the vertical field of view here is 30. Is it 50, let's say? And then maybe the walk camera or the idle camera is 45. And then the walk camera is 50. I don't know. And then the interacting camera is 30. Let's try that. And here I'm interacting. Wow, that is way too. That's get your player sick. All right, so to make your character your players not so sick, you can see we have this default blend ease in, ease out. Let's try 2 seconds here, and that'll take 2 seconds between each one of these. So it'll like add a nice slow movement as it's going between each one of those states. So now I'm moving. You can see it slowly comes out, and even 2 seconds might be too fast, maybe. So here's 5 seconds, and also we've got to look at the drasticness of the interaction camera moving. Maybe the idle camera might just be enough. So let's change this to 5 or 6. Let's see. That way it's slower, but we're getting a little bit of movement in and out. And remember, you could do other things here, like, you know, like you have all these other like extensions and stuff that you can add on each one of these cameras to have it do something cooler. So I would even say, yeah, even my interacting. I'll let you guys tweak these to whatever you like for your game. All right, so what we could also do, because it's giving us such a headache between those two ones, is you can see there's this thing called custom blends. And I'm just gonna, if you hit this cog, I'm gonna hit a new blend setting. And I'll just go into my games platformer folder, and I'll just leave it in art for now. And I'll leave it as state-driven camera blends. We could make a folder called cameras. Actually, let's do that in case we have any extra camera stuff that we want added. And I'll save that inside of cameras. So now we have the state-driven camera blends. And with this asset that we have here, you can see it has a list in here that's empty. If we go inside of our state-driven camera here, what we can do with this is set it up so that we have custom blends between these. All right, so let's expand this custom blends rollout. You can see there's a from, to, and blend. If I hit the plus sign, you can see when I'm going from idle to walk, what do I want to do? Do I want to cut? Do I want to ease in and do ease out? What do I want to do? So let's go ahead and go to ease in. And for the time for that, I want that to be 2 seconds when I'm going from idling to walking. And then I'm going to add another one. And I want to go from walking to essentially idling. And I want that to be slower. So that could be, 4 seconds. So now we have a custom ease in and ease out as we walk. And it'll override, this sort of just 5 seconds thing. So now you can see that's much faster. And then it slowly comes in when I stop. See that? So it's, again, you as the game designer, as the developer, as the indie developer, you kind of have to go in here and sort of tweak these to your liking. I would say have people play test it and just say, how does the camera feel to you? They might be like jarring or that feels great. Now, let's do one more for our interacting. But what I'd like to do with interacting is, because we could be walking, we could be transitioning, I want to go any camera. That means idle camera, walk camera. I want to transition to my interacting camera, and I want that to be, let's say, quicker. So I want that to be 1 second. So let's go ahead and test this out. All right, so here we are moving around, and let's go to our ladder here. So I start going down my ladder. You can see that zoomed in. And then as I climb in, I'm interacting with my ladder. It's a little bit more fast-paced gameplay. So just so that it's not too jarring, let's go ahead and add one more. And this is, oops, sorry, wrong one. Our custom blends here. We want to add one more, and this is from interacting camera to any camera. And what this can do is, if we're going back to our any camera, we can make this maybe 2 seconds or something. So that way it's not like snapping off the ladder. Like, like, I don't know if you noticed that when, let's see, when we're climbing here, and then I jump off, it starts to snap. So that just feels a lot better. All right, we've got some really cool camera logic. We've got our character running around. We're getting there. Yeah, and that's it for this lesson.